They say the most dangerous scams don't start with a threat. They start with a promise, a message that looks harmless, a compliment that feels sincere, a stranger online who seems to understand you better than anyone else ever has. For dozens of Americans across the country, that promise turned into a nightmare. Their hearts were stolen, their bank accounts were drained, and all the trails, every last dollar, led to one man living quietly in North Dakota. But here's the twist. He wasn't the one sending the love messages. He was the one catching the money. By the time investigators finally pieced everything together, over $4.7 million had vanished. Stay with me, because the way this web of lies unraveled is something you have never heard before. Before we dive in, comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support is what keeps us bringing you chilling, educational true crime stories every week. Now, sit back and let's begin this story in full. North Dakota is the kind of place most people imagine as quiet, predictable, almost frozen in time. And in the small city of Williston, life was exactly that: routine, cold, and unassuming. Which is why no one ever suspected that a major romance fraud operation, one that stretched across multiple states and even outside the country, had a crucial piece hidden right there. A regular man, a quiet neighbor, a bank account holder named Daniel BYTE. But to understand his role in this chilling case, we must start not with him, but with the people whose lives were shattered long before his name ever entered the picture. They were teachers, widows, retirees, single parents rebuilding their lives. Many of them were lonely, emotionally vulnerable, hoping for someone to talk to, someone who saw them, someone who cared. Some were women in their 60s and 70s. Others were recently divorced. A few were young professionals living alone, trying to find companionship online. They met charming strangers on dating sites, men with handsome photos, confident smiles, and stories that felt too perfect, because they were too perfect. These scammers spun beautiful lies like threads. I've never met anyone like you. I want a future with you. I trust you. And eventually, I need your help. At first, the victims thought they were helping a partner, someone they loved, someone who just needed a temporary financial boost. But every dollar they sent went into bank accounts held in the United States, accounts owned by people like Daniel BYTE, the middleman, the money catcher, the mule, and each victim thought they were the only one, when in reality, there were dozens. Pause. And as you're listening, let me know in the comments, have you ever seen a scam that felt too real to be fake? Your insight helps others stay safe. Between August 2015 and February 2021, a coordinated network of romance scammers created fake identities online: U.S. military officers, engineers working overseas, businessmen stuck traveling, widowers seeking one last chance at love. Once they gained trust, the emotional hooks tightened. Some victims were told the scammer was stranded abroad and needed emergency funds. Others were told their lover needed a temporary deposit to release a shipment or handle a bank freeze. Some were even manipulated into thinking they were investing into a future together. But no matter the story, the destination was always the same: deposit the money into this U.S. bank account. One of those accounts, regular on the outside, belonged to Daniel BYTE. He wasn't the one building romantic relationships. He wasn't the one making false promises of marriage or future business ventures. His job was simpler, but devastatingly important. He was the financial gateway. To neighbors and co-workers, Daniel was quiet, average, nothing unusual. He didn't flash wealth, he didn't brag, he didn't draw attention, but behind closed doors, money was flowing through his accounts, hundreds of thousands at a time, sometimes in rapid bursts, sometimes spaced out and disguised. Investigators would eventually describe him as one of the U.S. side money holders, a role that allowed the entire operation to function. He received the victims' transfers, withdrew or moved the funds, and sent them forward to the real masterminds, often overseas, keeping a cut for himself in the process. To the scammers, he was essential. To the victims, he was invisible. To law enforcement, he would soon become the puzzle piece that made everything fall into place. For years, these romance scams were treated as isolated incidents, one victim here, another in a different state, no immediate connection. But in 2020, something changed. A financial crimes analyst at IRS Criminal Investigation noticed a pattern. Different romance fraud complaints, filed months or even years apart, all referenced the same receiving bank accounts that did not belong to the supposed lovers, but to someone else entirely. The name Daniel Boadu began appearing across unrelated cases, small amounts, large amounts, wire transfers, cash deposits. At first glance, it looked random, but consistent flow, consistent timing, consistent origins told a different story. An algorithm flagged unusual transfer behavior. A second analyst cross-checked reports from multiple states. A third verified victim statement, and slowly the scattered puzzle pieces began forming one image. Someone was laundering romance fraud money on U.S. soil. Federal investigators began monitoring the accounts linked to Daniel. They tracked outgoing transfers, traced locations, followed transaction chains. Even though he wasn't messaging victims himself, his accounts showed patterns identical to organized fraud networks. By late 2020, they'd finally built enough evidence. Dozens of victims, millions in losses, multiple deposits tied to fake online romances, funds rerouted through Daniel's accounts. The trap was set. Agents obtained warrants, tracked his movements, followed his communications, coordinated across state lines. And on a cold morning in early 2021, they moved in. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Daniel stepped out of his home, expecting an ordinary day. But before he could reach his car, federal agents surrounded him, badges out, voices firm, handcuffs snapped shut. Neighbors peeked through their windows. Some gasped, some whispered. No one understood how the man they saw every morning, the man who kept to himself, could be connected to a $4.7 million romance fraud conspiracy. But agents knew, and the evidence told the story Daniel never would. He was taken into custody, interviewed, processed, and the long unraveling of this hidden operation began. By the time the case reached the Eastern District of Texas, the facts were overwhelming. He eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit money laundering, but the full truth of how investigators connected every thread and the surprising revelations that came out during the final stages of the investigation are something you need to hear, because the real twist in this case wasn't just the money, it wasn't only the victims, and it wasn't only Daniel's arrest, it was who they discovered behind him and how deep the deception really went. When federal agents dug deeper into Daniel Boadu's financial activity, they discovered something chilling. Daniel wasn't acting alone. He was just one link, a crucial link, in a much larger international network of romance scammers operating silently across borders. Behind him were the real puppeteers, the architects of identity theft, the operators of dozens of fake profiles, people who never touched the money directly but pulled every string from a distance. Investigators traced the flows of funds leaving Daniel's accounts, moving through layers of transfers, conversion services, other mule accounts, and finally disappearing into shadows overseas. If Daniel was the face of the conspiracy in the United States, the real masterminds were ghosts. Ghosts investigators were determined to unmask. The more agents learned, the more horrifying the picture became. Victims described endless nights of emotional manipulation, phone calls full of affection, messages dripping with love, plans of marriage, travel, family, all from men who did not exist. But the bank records were real. The transfers were real. The heartbreak was real. The debt many victims were left with, painfully real. Agents re-interviewed victims, some trembling, some ashamed, some still in disbelief. One elderly woman broke down as she recounted how she sold her late husband's tools and borrowed against her home to help the man she believed would spend the rest of his life with her. Another victim admitted she had been sending money for over a year before realizing she'd been lied to. A younger victim, just 32, confessed she thought the scammer was her soulmate. Investigators realized they weren't just dealing with fraud, they were dealing with emotional warfare, and Daniel BYTE, whether he intended it or not, had become a vital officer in that war. Federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of Texas began assembling the case. They pieced together bank statements, digital communication logs, victim complaints, IP traces, overseas financial routes, statements from cooperating witnesses, expert testimony on romance fraud psychology. The prosecution called it a long-running conspiracy designed to exploit love, trust, and vulnerability for profit. Daniel's defense team claimed he didn't know the full scale, that he just moved money, that he didn't create the fake profiles, that he never messaged victims. But prosecutors countered with a devastating point. Whether or not he sent the messages, he helped the scam succeed. Every dollar that passed through his accounts, every transfer he initiated, every cut he kept, made him an active part of a machine that destroyed lives. When Daniel finally appeared before Judge Michael J. Trunkale, the courtroom was quiet. Victims sat in the benches behind him. Some came in wheelchairs, some came with family, some came alone. For many, it was the first time they had ever seen the man who handled the money they'd lost. The prosecution presented victim statements, letters full of grief, embarrassment, anger, and loss. Some victims said they could never trust again. Some said they were financially ruined. Some said they still cry every night. Each story weighed heavily. Prosecutors argued that while Daniel wasn't the mastermind, his role was essential. Without people like him, the scam collapses. The defense tried to argue for leniency. They said Daniel wasn't violent. He wasn't the one manipulating emotions. He wasn't the one pretending to be a lover, a soldier, a businessman, a widower. But the judge saw the bigger picture. Just before sentencing, prosecutors revealed a surprising detail. Daniel's accounts had not been used for one scam network, but for multiple different romance fraud cells, some operating independently, some connected, some are still active. His accounts, investigators discovered, were part of a shared laundering pipeline, used by various scammers who didn't even know each other. To them, he was a tool, a safe route, a dependable transfer channel. This revelation changed everything. It meant Daniel wasn't just a middleman, he was a laundering hub, a central node that linked dozens of victims to multiple scam networks. This made the case even larger than investigators initially believed. When it was time for Judge Trunkale to deliver the sentence, the courtroom held its breath. The judge looked directly at Daniel and said, "By enabling this fraud, you helped prey on people at their most vulnerable. You allowed criminals to hide behind your accounts and destroy lives through deception." Then the hammer fell. 54 months in federal prison and a staggering $4.7 million in restitution. Daniel showed little emotion. He simply lowered his head. Some victims cried, some held hands, some felt a sense of closure for the first time in years. But for all of them, the wounds remained. In the months following the sentencing, federal agencies used the data from Daniel's case to track down more members of the overseas networks. A few individuals were indicted, some were arrested. Several profiles and accounts were shut down. But romance scams remain one of the most difficult crimes to eradicate. They thrive on loneliness, on hope, on trust. And as long as people search for connection, scammers will continue to hide behind screens, waiting for a chance to strike. However, because of cases like this, because of investigators who don't give up, because of victims who come forward, more people are being warned, educated, and protected. Daniel's conviction wasn't just a punishment. It became a message, a warning to money mules, and a reminder to everyone online. Love may be blind, but fraud never is. This case teaches all of us something powerful. Scammers don't always look like criminals. Sometimes they look like someone down the street, someone with a regular job, someone who blends in, and romance scammers rarely work alone. There are layers: the seducers, the manipulators, the financial handlers, the overseas organizers. Every layer is dangerous, and every layer leaves victims with scars they never expected. Thank you for watching this story to the very end. Your time matters. Your awareness matters. Your support keeps BYTE crimes alive. If this case touched you, if you learned something, if you believe more people should hear stories like this, please like this video, drop a comment, even if it's just, "I'm wiser now." And subscribe to BYTE Crimes, because the more awareness we create, the fewer hearts and bank accounts will be broken by these digital predators. Stay safe, stay smart, and remember, on the internet, not everyone is who they say they are.